We are going into the last, I think, just over a week of the Magical Readathon, and definitely the last vlog that I'll be putting together for this. Going in, I think about 7 books still on my TBR, although I am about halfway through The Butcher's Masquerade, which is a really long audiobook, so that's not as bad as it feels. And I'm almost finished with Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. I won't be talking about either of those in this vlog because I feel like The Butcher's Masquerade is far enough through Dungeon Crawler Carl, and so many people are picking up that series right now that it would just be too full of spoilers to be worthwhile. And Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, I'm recording my thoughts on, and I will post that eventually, but I won't be talking about it in this vlog because that is a book choice for the Plot Luck podcast, which is a monthly book club I've started with one of my friends in real life, and we're posting kind of 2 episodes a month. I'll link to that down in the description below. The books that I will probably talk to you about in this vlog are Redneck, Revenant by David Slayton, A Turn of the Wheel by Catherine Labadie, Nepo by Essy, and The Antlered King by Marianne Gordon. That's if I don't get distracted by side quests, extra classes, or adventure board activities. This weekend is the Magical All-Nighter, so I'm hoping to make a really good start, and I will either film some updates during the All-Nighter or I'll let you know how I got on Monday morning. It is the morning after the Magical All-Nighter, or I guess we're still in the Magical All-Nighter weekend, but reading sprints finished at midnight my time, and this is now the next morning. During the sprints, I started and was actually able to finish an entire book, which I'm very pleased about. I read the entire Redneck Revenant, which is the 4th book in the Adam Binder, I was going to say trilogy, but obviously this is the 4th book. I also read, I think, a handful of chapters, a few chapters of Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. I took part in the entire 10-hour sprints, and I probably could have read more or should have read a bit more than just the Adam Binder book because it isn't that long for an urban fantasy. But I did spend quite a bit of my time doom scrolling on my phone and kind of playing about with things, pottering around the house. I then really struggled to get to sleep after the readathon, so I listened to a bit more of Butcher's Masquerade as an audiobook while I was trying to nod off. For Redneck Revenant, I had a really good time with this book, and I had a really great time jumping back into the series. I read the first book in a sort of companion series set in the same universe last week. So if you want to check that out, please do. That was Rogue Community College. And although that was nice to dip my toe back into the world, this was really getting back to the characters that I had known and loved in the original Adam Binder trilogy. You could read this one without having read Rogue Community College, but I do think you'll get a lot more from it if you have. There are some very big events in Rogue Community College that are tied to some of the supporting characters in the main trilogy. And if you want to know what has happened to them in the kind of time between the end of the original trilogy and now, you're going to have to read Community College to find that out. This one references it pretty thoroughly, and I do think it would, if you care then it would help to have read community college first. I also think, although this is a new chapter in the universe or the series, whatever, I don't think you'd get much from it if you haven't read the original trilogy. I suppose in theory you could. This is a new plot line, it's a new story, but there are a lot of references back to characters and events from the original books. And honestly, why wouldn't you? Because the original trilogy is amazing, so you should read that as well. So yeah, I personally, my personal opinion would be, if you want to read this book, then go back to the start. The first book is White Trash Warlock, and you'll have 5 really great urban fantasies to kind of sink your teeth into. This one I struggled with a little at first, and I kind of expected it to be a bit more action-packed, a bit that sense of urgency to come through very, very early on, because I was thinking of it as the continuing after our big kind of finale. That was doing it a disservice. It's not a continuation of that trilogy's plotline, of that story. This is almost another arc, and obviously it then takes its own time to build up. We're coming in after the fact of the original trilogy, but we're not continuing those plot lines, and it makes sense that you have to lay the foundations for the new plot arc. You need to gradually increase the tension. The book does come to a really, really action-packed, dramatic conclusion, which nicely layers in new threads that we can continue in future books. It pulls in moments from community college and probably sets up some things in motion over there. And it does a really great job of getting me back into the world once I personally, as a reader, had got my head around the fact that this was a new story arc. I think one of the other reasons that maybe this felt a little slower, this plotline, the books have always been very personal. They're very much about Adam and his family. They are, I would say, more personal, more character driven than a lot of other urban fantasies I've read. But this book specifically, and both the contained plot in this book and the plot it sets up, feels like it's going to be even more tied to Adam, his family, his past. And at the same time, we are dealing with all of the mental baggage, all of the emotional trauma that he is bringing to this book from what he has gone through in the preceding sequel, which I love that David Slayton has actually gave that sense of continuity. We're seeing the ripple effects and the trauma from all the action, all the magic, all the events in those previous books, rather than just wiping the slate clean and having this slightly robotic wizard who is able to, suffer horrifically and just bounce back again and again. We see some of the ways that past trauma has affected Adam. It does leave to a bit more retrospection and a little bit more, self-analysis, digging through his thoughts, his emotions, than I would maybe have expected. Clayton did a great job, and by the end, I was completely convinced it was all the right choices. I was a little anxious about continuing it because I felt the original trilogy wrapped up so well. I thought it was such a really good example of a trilogy, a series that, it nails the landing without overstaying its welcome. And when stories come back a few years after the fact, it sometimes can feel like a crash grab. I don't think this was that. I think this was a really original take. I think it's expanding the world nicely. And I think it's a really solid installment in the series. And I'm hopefully, this is at very least a whole new trilogy. But also, if we're bringing in the Rogue Community College aspects, I would love to see this expand out into one of those urban fantasy series that goes on for a really long time. It wasn't quite a 5-star read for me, just because at the beginning I did struggle with it a little. I would say this is coming in definitely a 4 or a 4.5. It was a very, very good book, and I'm very happy to see the series being picked up again. For the books that I still want to finish over the rest of this week, I have 2 very, very chunky books and 1 slightly smaller one. So I think what I'm going to do is start the slightly smaller one and hope that maybe I could get that done today or tomorrow. If I get a chance to actually sit down with my Kindle, then I think I'm going to start on Nepo by Essy next, which I think is a sort of dystopian sci-fi with clone celebrities and some neurodivergent rep. It should be very, very different from what I've been reading so far this month. And I think I'd like to tick off another one before I go into the two fantasies I have, which I think are going to be quite long and quite dense. So I am another book down. I kept reading yesterday. After the all-nighter reading sprints, I caught up on a lot of housework and things I had to do, but I did get to spend most of the Sunday reading as well. I managed to get through Nepo by Essy Knopf. This was one that I have had on my NetGalley shelf for way too long. It is a sci-fi dystopian. Those genres they're not my favorite genres, and quite honestly, that was why it's kind of lingered on my NetGalley shelf for a while. But it was a book I needed for animal studies for the debut book prompt, and I'm really glad I got to it. Nepo is set in a Los Angeles of the future in a post climate change world, but we really focus in on the two kind of stratas to the society. We have the enclave and the enclavers, they're the rich, they're the elites, they're the upper class. And then we have the slumborn they're impoverished, they're poor. And into this mix, we have Nepos. Nepos are clones of successful actors produced once every 10 years so that that famous actor can continue acting in the franchises they have previously been involved in. Nepos do all age at a normal rate, but because every 10 years you have a new Nepo being born, being thrust into the spotlight, it almost works like a chain reaction. As Harrison Ford, the original, ages out, Harrison Ford 2, who's 10 years younger, can move up and take over those franchises, and then the ripple effect goes down. We are following Cheyenne number 5, I think, and he is, at this stage, he's 16. He's in a acting school where he's perfecting his craft. He's starting to work some jobs. There tend to be teenage type movies. And these are called perpetuals because they are prequels, sequels, spin-offs, as we become more and more obsessed with watching things we're familiar with, watching stories and faces we know, that nostalgia for the past. Obviously, that is what drives then the audiences, and so the studios cater to that, and to cater to that, they've created the Nepo system. One of the interesting things is the idea that all of the Nepos should be clones, personality-wise as well as looks, of their original. When they do interviews, Shai has to perform as the original actor that he's been cloned from, but his personality is actually very different from that original actor, so he is quite often putting on a front to just about everyone around him. The story kicks off when Shai is forced to leave an interview in the slum without any of the security he should have, and he's very nearly kidnapped. He's then contacted by an unknown user on a forum board who is the younger brother of one of the kidnappers and the kidnapper that got killed in the failed kidnapping. Together, they start to investigate what happened because obviously this kidnapper's brother does not think that this is something his brother would have done willingly. And together they start to unravel the politicking, the intrigue behind the scenes of these production companies and of the kind of Nepo world. The writing was really good. The writing straight off the bat was, especially for a debut, was bang on. I very quickly was kind of plowing through the book. I was eating up big chunks of it at a time. It had a very, very readable writing style, and which is something I sometimes struggle with in sci-fi. This kept things nice and simple. It wasn't too flowery, it wasn't too technical. It was a really nice level of readability, especially for that kind of YA audience. There were a lot of different things going on, as well as the dystopian setting and the different two-tier society, which I would have loved to have seen a bit more of. We get a lot from Shy's point of view, obviously, which is the higher enclave society. I would have loved to have seen a bit more of the slum. We are told that they have their own kind of rebel cities, and outside of the production company's sphere of influence, there are Nepos that have broke out and kind of either had surgery or just recreated their lives. I'd love to have seen more of this world outside of Shy's, his bubble. But I think for this introductory book, there was enough to give you a flavour of it. There were moments where I did feel that things came a little too easily to Shy, because Augustin always had a solution. Shy was if Shy was reluctant to steal some piece of equipment that they thought might have information on it because he wasn't sure how he would get out of the house, then it was very quickly presented that the solution was, I'll speak to my hacktivist friends in the underground and they'll send a drone over, and just things always seemed to be provided for him to keep him involved in the investigation, in the low-key rebellion. And I did wonder whether he was going to get double crossed. So that just maybe felt like the character had too easy a time of it. But honestly, that was a really minor detail, and I really did enjoy the story. The end has very much a cliffhanger ending. This is currently listed as a standalone, but when I submitted my NetGalley review, they got in contact and said that there is definitely a sequel planned. It is in the works. And I'm really happy with that, because I was willing to accept it as a standalone, as a sort of ambiguous ending. But I just feel there's so much unexplored in this world. There's so many hints at things that could be really interesting, that I definitely think it has the legs to expand out. I have one more book to read that is specifically for Aldine Excavationist, and then I can work on finishing those additional callings that I signed myself up for. Since finishing Nepo, I moved on to Turn of the Wheel by Catherine Labadie. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. I wouldn't say this is cozy. I would say it's doing that cottagecore vibes really, really well. And it's very much a slow burn romance. So I think we're maybe saying, I would say it's a cottagecore romantasy, if we're gonna get technical. We follow Anira. She is 19. She lives in this very, very rural village where they tend the orchards. She's currently in the middle of what feel like vaguely pagan rituals to do with betrothal, but she is struggling because she doesn't feel like this is what she wants from her life. Her father is very supportive. This isn't a woman is forced into a marriage she doesn't want. This isn't a patriarchal society that's abusing her. She just engaged to her childhood sweetheart, and she's starting to think that maybe though life in this village isn't enough for her. And I really do like that this isn't painted as being someone's fault. It is just people growing in different ways. It definitely does have that slow, meandering cottagecore pacing, which maybe wasn't the best book to pick for a readathon, especially as we go into the last week of the month and I'm starting to see those deadlines looming. But I'm actually really enjoying it. It is very sedate, I think that's maybe the word, and the descriptions are really lush and really beautiful. So I'm trying to just embrace the book for what it is and enjoy that, rather than racing through to finish it. Even if it means that I have to maybe use some of those scrolls, I want to really enjoy the book I'm reading. So Anira has met Terran. He is a potioner, and he sees something in Anira, her skill with plants and herbs, her kind of analytical mind, her intelligence, and he offers to essentially take her on as an apprentice. At the same time, Anira is looking for a bit of guidance in her future, in her life, and she summons it's a spirit of truth. I think at different times it's referred to as either one of the fairy or a demon, and it's called Veritas. And she summons Veritas to tell her what she knows in her heart. He's going to confirm for her that this village just isn't enough. And they're maybe gonna hook up in the woods a couple of times. So while that's happening, As a result of their trysts in the woods, Anira and Veritas develop a bond. Like literally, she binds her to him unintentionally. And she finds out that Veritas and Terran are actually the same person. Veritas is also tied to Terran's bloodline, and he inhabits Terran's body occasionally. So we have a kind of three-way love triangle with only the two people, which is really interesting. But I honestly still wouldn't say that the romance is overpowering in this. Where we are now, Anira and Terran have left the village, going off to the big city. Terran has to do some work for the king, and Anira is going with him to help him as his assistant, but she also is going to go off and do some research in the big city library about demons and fae, to see if she can figure out how to unbind Terran and Veritas, how to unbind herself from Veritas, and to see whether some of the strange occurrences that have been happening in their village are. So I will update you when I get to the end of A Turn of the Wheel and let you know whether or not this is the last book I'm going to read or whether I'm going to be able to fit the Antler King in as well. And so I am wrapping up this Magical Readathon vlog and Magical Readathon for 2025 in general with A Turn of the Wheel by Catherine Labadie. As I said when I started it, this is a longer book in the upper 500 pages region, but more importantly, it has a very slow, very lazy feel, especially to the start of the book. And it maybe wasn't the perfect choice for a readathon where you're really trying to get through as many books as quickly as possible. But I do feel this one was best savoured slowly and enjoyed. So instead of rushing to finish it and grabbing the next book on my TBR, I've used some scrolls creatively, used those points that I had sitting from the Magical All-Nighter, and I've managed to complete my TBR using those. I've not actually read One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig, but from what I've heard, this feels like a softer, more cottagecore romantic version of that gothic story. I think if you've enjoyed one, you might want to check out the other because they do have some similar tropes in common. There was so much that I loved in this book. Anira, the main character, was a real force of nature. I was a little unsure about her at first. She seemed a little up and down in terms of characterization, but by the end, the author had really convinced me that this was consistent for her character. She's just very complicated. She has a lot of nuance to her character, and which made her feel like a really believable person, a fully rounded human being. She is stubborn and she's independent, but she can also be quite impulsive and flighty, and she's very intelligent, and balancing the two of those can lead her into trouble. I loved the relationships that the author built for Anira through the book. Obviously, there is the romantic story with Terran and the sexual friendship between her and Veritas. But we also get some really solid female friendships in this book. Her best friends from the village are devoted to her right from the start, and we see how, despite some disagreements and some differences of opinion that the three girls have, they do stick with each other doggedly right to the end. I also really love the relationship that Anira has with her father. It's so supportive and so caring, and that real familial sense of protecting and looking out for someone and loving someone, even when you maybe don't agree with all their actions, but being completely devoted to them. And I love that we saw that from both Anira's side and her father's. His protectiveness wasn't framed as something that was a bad thing because she was just as protective of him. And they were very much helping and supporting each other through all these different trials that they faced. While I stick with my opinion that this is not quite cozy, but definitely a cottage core, lazy summer, early autumn vibe of book, it does get darker, especially in the second half. Anir has a lot of challenges to face, and they all sort of combine and interweave as we run towards that big finale, and it is a big finale. We have witch hunts and religious conflict. We have some political scheming and royal intervention. And we also have the supernatural threat from the fairies in a general way, and that unknown of what Veritas himself is looking for. There are some great villains here, and it all just kind of interweaves. She doesn't know what way to turn. Everything she does impacts some other antagonist, and it made it feel really fleshed out. I really enjoyed this book. I don't know that I would go as far as a 5-star, but I would comfortably say a 4.5, and I'll probably round it up when it comes to rating it. There are a couple of moments you might want to be aware of if you were going to pick this up yourself. Yes, it definitely does have that cozy romanticy vibe, I've said again and again, and that's how it's marketed, and that is a completely honest marketing. But there is also one scene of an attempted assault and references to assault later in the book. So although it has that really cozy, soft, romantic vibe to it, there are a couple of darker moments, and you might want to check out the trigger warnings for it instead of just trusting entirely in this beautiful cover. While this maybe wasn't the best book to end a readathon with in terms of pacing, I had such a good time with it. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm definitely going to be picking up books in this universe. I think there are several standalone interconnected novels, and definitely from the author again in the future. I think I'll probably want to reread this one as well because it had such a lovely, slow, relaxing pacing. I'd like to go back in a month where I'm not trying to hit a number of books and just really immerse myself in it fully, possibly before I go on to read those companion novels. I had a really good week this week with Magical Readathon. I think my books worked out almost perfectly. I read Redneck Revenant during the Magical All-Nighter, and that fit perfectly because we had a wizard who visited a magical school and used a magical library for reference while we were actually doing our all-night reading sprints. That just fit the theme and fit the vibe. And then I've ended with a book that also has a lot of magical research. We have Anira visiting the library and apprenticing with Terran. And again, that just fits all those Aurelian vibes. So I've had another great round of Magical Readathon. I am really excited to say that my character has achieved all of her goals and will be going into her second year of her Aldean excavationist calling when we get to spring. I really hope that you have enjoyed this video. I hope that maybe you're tempted by some of the books that I've mentioned. If you are, let me know in the comments below. And if you're not, then just leave me some kind of floral emoji for a turn of the wheel. I really hope that I see you in the next video. Goodbye.